very excited to make a return to the world of Android, but this time around, REDMAGIC is back with their latest device, the REDMAGIC 10 Air, which continues REDMAGIC's aspirations to design the unrivaled gaming experience, at least in the mobile space, but in a lighter, thinner, and cheaper package. The REDMAGIC 10 Air packs the power of Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 into a 7.85mm thick and 205-gram package that promises to provide a flagship-level experience at an unmatched price. So, please join me, Rob the Retro Tech Dad, as we explore REDMAGIC's 10 Air and find out if the Air can redefine what it means to be both light and powerful. As we always do, let's talk specs, price, and do a quick unboxing and tour of the new REDMAGIC 10 Air, which comes in the pretty standard REDMAGIC packaging with the very subtle Air branding at the top. The REDMAGIC 10 Air comes powered by Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, and this is actually not the first time that I've covered the capabilities of this chipset, which we saw last year in REDMAGIC's own Nova tablet. Unlike its older sibling, the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, which has the latest from Qualcomm with the 8 Elite, REDMAGIC has opted to use an older chipset to help keep the price of the Air down. But the 8 Gen 3 is no slouch and is an 8-core chipset with a Cortex X4 and speeds up to 3.3 GHz and uses the Adreno 750 for graphics, which does provide some advantages currently in terms of driver support due to the maturity of the chipset. The 10 Air uses a 6.8-inch 120Hz display with a resolution of 2480 by 1116 that features a 93.7% screen-to-body ratio without any visible notch or punch-out for the front-facing camera, which has been one of my personal favorite features of REDMAGIC devices. The display has a peak brightness of 1600 nits with a 100% DCI P3 color gamut. The REDMAGIC 10 Air will be available, as usual, in several configurations, starting with 12GB of LPDDR5X RAM and 256GB of UFS 4.0 internal storage for the Twilight and Hailstone colors, and then a 16GB and 512GB option for the Twilight, Hailstone, as well as a really slick looking flare model that will be available at a later date. Unfortunately, the REDMAGIC 10 Air does not feature a microSD slot on any of the models, so you will definitely want to consider use cases to determine which model will work best for you. We've got Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 5.4, NFC support, dual SIM capability, a USB Type-C for data, charging, and video out, and unfortunately we do not have a 3.5mm headset unlike the REDMAGIC 10 Pro. On the front of the device, we do have the same 16-megapixel under-display camera that we've seen on other REDMAGIC devices, and the camera quality itself is nothing groundbreaking, but for the intended audience of this device, I don't think it'll be too much of an issue. On the back of the Air, we do have dual 50-megapixel cameras, one of which features optical image stabilization, and the other that provides an ultra-wide angle. Unlike the 10 Pro, the rear cameras do have a slight bump out and are actually not a completely flat design. Out of the box, we have REDMAGIC OS 10.0, which is built on Android 15. And the Air features a 6000 mAh battery with support for 80-watt fast charging as well as charging separation. And as always, we will be putting the battery through its paces later on in the video. Inside the package, we do have an included 80-watt fast charge capable power adapter, the REDMAGIC style USB Type-C cable, a slim case, and the usuals like an insert and SIM tool. The REDMAGIC 10 Air will be available later in the month direct from the REDMAGIC website for early bird access, which will begin on April 29th with open sales beginning on May 7th. The Air will be available in many regions including North America, Europe, the UK, Asia, and beyond. Pricing starts at $549 for the Twilight and Hailstone 12GB and 256GB models, and goes up to $699 for the Twilight, Hailstone, and Flare 16GB and 512GB models. I'd like to thank REDMAGIC for providing me the Air ahead of launch so that I can provide my viewers with the most detailed information, and as I always require, this video was not reviewed prior to publishing. And let's just take a moment and talk about the design of the Air, which REDMAGIC has focused on creating a thin and light device that is gaming oriented. The thinness as well as the weight is particularly noticeable when I grab the 10 Pro and then immediately pick up the 10 Air, which despite weighing only 25 grams less, feels much lighter in the hands. And this, combined with the thinness but subtle smoothness and roundness of the Air, makes it feel better as well in the hands. I do like that the entirety of the device has a slight curve instead of the harsher and sharper edges of the 10 Pro. It's a beautiful feeling device in the hands with a matte metal body, and I do much prefer this type of texture over what we've seen on other devices, like the 10 Pro here, which is just a fingerprint magnet and needs to be wiped down constantly, and it was actually something that I complained about in my 10 Pro video. Whereas with the Air, this matte texture holds up incredibly well to handling. The Air really does look like a premium device that, while gaming focused, doesn't give away its true purpose. Of course, we have some of the REDMAGIC touches that the brand is known for in their devices, like the subtle RGB lighting and the built-in triggers with a 520Hz response rate that can be mapped in-game and used for various gaming situations, like I've done here for Racing Master, using it as dedicated buttons for the brake and drifting. We do have the return of the dedicated game space button, and yes, you heard that right, it's now a button instead of a switch that REDMAGIC calls their magic key, and it can now be customized to do more than just bring up game space, and can be mapped to activate the camera, mute notifications, and even turn on the flashlight. Now, one very big difference with the Air is the omission of any type of active cooling, since REDMAGIC's goal with the Air was to make it as light and as thin as possible. They've instead opted for solely relying on their IceX cooling system, which features 9 layers including liquid metal, a large vapor chamber, and materials like graphene and copper to help with thermals. We will definitely be looking at this a little bit further in just a moment. Much like with past REDMAGIC devices, one of the highlights, at least for me personally, has always been the beautiful displays that REDMAGIC uses with the nearly bezel-less design and under-display camera that gives you a full viewing experience for your games and any other types of content. Now, the display here is not as good as the one found in the 10 Pro, which has a slightly higher resolution, refresh rate, and brightness capacity, but that does not take away from the display used here with the Air, which still looks phenomenal in person with great colors and excellent brightness. The 120Hz refresh rate is realistically ideal for most of the top-end gaming experiences on Android, as well as excellent for something like game streaming. And I was pretty impressed by the audio experience here as well, which really held up even when at max volume, pumping out fairly clear sound. Now, REDMAGIC is using dual speakers for this, but one speaker has audio coming out of the side of the Air, whereas the other speaker comes out from the front of the device. But with this combination produces a fairly strong experience that I find to be quite enjoyable. Finally, we have the return of REDMAGIC's game space, and if you're familiar with REDMAGIC devices, it features a lot of cool gaming-focused customizations for Android that starts with the press of the magic key, which brings up REDMAGIC's game space. Thanks to game space, we have access to things like adjusting performance settings on the fly from the available presets of Eco, Balance, and Rise, as well as a secret Diablo mode. In addition, we have other cool gaming-focused features like frame rate counters, CPU and GPU clock speeds, and even using it as a front end for all of your games. Now, another very cool feature, and actually a more recent feature that was added to REDMAGIC's game space, is the ability to use interpolation to scale certain games from 60 frames per second to 120 frames per second, which is another great way to make use of the 120Hz refresh rate display that we have here with the Air, and much like we've seen in the PC world, we can enjoy similar features here over in the mobile space, and make use of the available power that the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 provides, which does require the phone to be in either Rise or Diablo mode to make use of the interpolation feature, and depending on the game, I'd definitely recommend pairing with some type of cooler if you're looking to use it long term for the best performance. And speaking of performance, let's go ahead and put the Air to the test and check out how it fares with a round of synthetic benchmarks. Now, for this section, I will be doing some things a little differently. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 is definitely not new to the channel, and I've extensively benchmarked the chipset in other devices like the OnePlus Pad 2 and the REDMAGIC Nova, so if you're looking for even more numbers, comparisons, and even just game testing, I definitely recommend checking those videos out, which will be linked somewhere on screen and in the description. Since it's a fairly known quantity at this point, I wanted to actually compare the various performance presets that REDMAGIC provides through its game space with the Eco, Balance, Rise, and the secret, or maybe not so secret, Diablo mode preset. So let's start out with the Geekbench 6 numbers to get an idea of CPU performance with the Diablo mode preset, coming in with a multi-core score of 6,728 and a single core score of 2,248. Next, we've got the Rise preset coming in with a multi-core score of 6,937 and a single core score of 2,159. which does show that these two presets are quite similar, and in general I tend to stick with Rise when I need the most performance. So we've got the balance preset next, which comes in with a multi-core score of 5882 and a single core score of 1280. And we can see that it's clearly downclocking on the single core in comparison to the Rise and Diablo presets. And finally, the Eco preset, which unsurprisingly offers the lowest scores, coming in at 4825 for the multi-core score and 1012 for the single core score. Let's switch over to 3D Mark's Wildlife Extreme and quickly look at the scores here, with the Diablo mode coming in at 4820. And then the Rise preset coming in at 4655, and we can see that the numbers, like in the Geekbench test, are quite similar even on the GPU side. Next, we've got the Balance preset coming in at 3969, which isn't too far behind. And to give a good idea of what that score actually means, the number for balanced mode on the Air still outperforms the best numbers from a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 device. For example, something like the Odin 2, which is actively cooled and demonstrates just how much power we have even at the balanced setting. Finally, the Eco preset with the lowest score overall at 2403, and we can clearly see that at least for GPU performance, that the Eco preset is limiting performance, in particular on the GPU, quite significantly. Now let's check out the Antutu numbers quickly, and Diablo mode came in with an overall score of 1,841,352, with the Rise preset coming in at 1,873,838, again demonstrating the similarities between the two presets. And then the Balance preset, which comes in with a very strong score of 1,678,891, that continues to demonstrate the power on hand with this preset. And finally, the Eco mode preset, which came in with an overall score of 1,590,556. And I did run the Wildlife Extreme stress test back to back to really put the REDMAGIC 10 Air under some pressure, and using the Rise preset, the Air demonstrated very consistent numbers in a back-to-back 20-minute stress test. So in total 40 minutes, and maintained in general just shy of 85% stability, which is really solid for a device without any kind of active cooling. And the highest loop scores at around 4,650 and lowest scores of around 3,950. And this is actually kind of interesting, since it tells me that we can get away with using the Balance preset, since its scores were very similar once you take into account the throttling that occurs on the higher Rise preset. And so for all my game testing, I will be using the Balanced preset, since I do believe that is the average situation for most of my viewers, and in general I definitely recommend using an external cooler if you want to make use of the Rise or Diablo presets to sustain that maximum performance. So before we dive into gaming, let's check in with some telescopic controllers and see how they fit with the REDMAGIC 10 Air using the included slim case. And I've rounded up 4 different controllers for this, with 2 larger full-size options with the GameSir G8 Plus and ABXYlute S9, and then 2 smaller, more compact options, the Backbone and ASUS ROG Tessen. So up first, we have my favorite telescopic option with the GameSir G8 Plus, and this one fits beautifully with the REDMAGIC 10 Air with or without its case. And since this is a Bluetooth option, I think in general any case you decide to use with the Air will work with the G8 Plus, making it one of the better options from the group. There's also a slick REDMAGIC branded version of these controllers as well. Next, we have a more recent favorite of mine with the ABXYlute S9, and this is another full-size controller option and a very solid competitor to the G8 Plus. And this is a USB Type-C controller, so you are getting that hard connection with pass-through charging capabilities. And with the case on, the Air does fit just perfectly. And so this is a good option for those wanting to use the included case and a USB Type-C connection. Let's switch to the smaller options with the older Backbone controller up first, and unfortunately this one does not work with the case on, and so you will have to remove the included case in order to use it with something like the Backbone. And it's too bad, because I do like how compact this setup feels overall. But let's check out the newer ASUS ROG Tessen, which is also very compact and can even fold down to become a smaller unit. The good news is that the Tessen does work with the Air with or without its case. And this one has a USB Type-C connection and much nicer analog sticks compared to the Backbone. And so I do like this option overall for a compact solution. So we're all geared up, and I think I'm ready, and I bet everyone else is ready, to dive into some Android gaming. And let's start out pretty light using the Eco mode on the REDMAGIC 10 Air, and I'm pretty excited to feature TMNT Shredder's Revenge, which is not new to Android, but is now available separately from a Netflix subscription on the Play Store. And so I just had to feature this game again since it's one of my personal favorites, and unsurprisingly this game runs great, using just the eco mode with the air. Now for another game that just dropped recently on the Play Store, and a very pleasant surprise since this was actually one of my personal favorites from last year, the Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown takes the Prince back to its side-scrolling roots and combines it with Metroidvania-style gameplay with great graphics, and it's just a blast to play, and I highly recommend checking this one out on the Play Store, since we really do want to encourage more of these type of games and ports to make it to Android. And I'm still on the eco mode, and the Prince of Persia: Lost Crown with the 60 frames per second target is staying at or very close to that target, and it really does show how much power we have even at the eco mode setting, and so we can keep the thermals down as well as maximize battery life with this setting, but still enjoy a high quality game like The Lost Crown. Now here's a game that hasn't quite made its way to the Play Store, at least if you're in North America. But if you download the TapTap.io app, you will be able to download Racing Master, which was released for the Southeast Asia region, but can be enjoyed for users outside of those areas, and it's well worth the download because this game is a ton of fun and it's an incredible visual showcase for what the Android platform can provide, especially given the kind of power we have in our devices nowadays. Now for Racing Master, I did switch over to the balanced mode, which we will see provides plenty of power, and for the rest of this Android portion is what we're going to be sticking with. Now by using balance mode, we can set Racing Master to use the ultra high quality HD resolution and a 60 frames per second target, which is the maximum settings allowed with the game, and demonstrates that balance mode is really giving us enough muscle to run a lot of what Android can offer. And honestly, the performance doesn't slow down at all, since even heavier hitters like Genshin Impact, for example, can run at the highest settings with the only change made to the target frames per second, which I set to 60 from 30, and we are still using balance mode, and the game runs great, which means we can easily make use of the Interpolation feature that's been added to REDMAGIC GameSpace. The same thing for another demanding game with Wuthering Waves here, set to use the high and ultra high settings across the board with a 60 frames per second target and FSR on, and this game looks absolutely stunning on this display, especially with these settings. And again, performance is just looking very solid using the balance mode, and it really does show just how much can be done with this setting, and as a result, how we can get away with the need for much active cooling. And of course, I can't forget about Diablo Immortal, which is definitely a good benchmark for me since it can be scaled in various ways to accommodate all kinds of devices. But here on the REDMAGIC 10 Air, Diablo Immortal can be enjoyed with the highest settings possible across the board, with the 60 frames per second target using the balanced mode, and much like we've seen in the prior games shown, performance here is excellent. Let's go ahead and check out another racing game, and one that is also a very good showcase for benchmarking performance. I have Wreckfest here, which is a fantastic port to the Play Store and well worth purchasing, and for this game we're still using that balance mode, but with high settings across the board with the quality dynamic resolution and the max frames per second limit, which lets us hit 90 frames per second with these settings. Now the only thing we lose out here in terms of the best possible visual fidelity is going from high to ultra in the texture quality, and going from high to extreme screen scaling, and lastly from high to ultra on the grass amount. Personally, I don't think it's too much of a loss here, since I'll just go ahead and switch over to everything now maxed out, and you will see that even in balance mode with the max settings across the board, the Air is still managing more than 60 frames per second, which is absolutely wild. And let's close out this showcase of Android gaming performance with two very popular games on Android. And of course, I didn't forget about Fortnite, which I think by now we kinda know what to expect here. And with the highest settings, using the balance preset, we are hitting 90 frames per second with very minimal dips, and really only at that initial drop, and even then it smooths out quite a bit. And it's really just an awesome showing for the Air and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. And let's cap it all out with some Call of Duty Warzone, which is always just a blast to hop in and play, especially with a nice controller attached to your device. I've got some custom settings for this one using high across the board with an uncapped frames per second. Unsurprisingly, we've got no issues hitting 90 frames per second with these settings using balance mode, and this is with the visual quality maxed out to peak, and gameplay is very smooth on the Air. So enough of Android games, let's check out how the Air fares with emulation. And I'll start out first with some PlayStation 2 emulation with Nether SX2, and just dive right into the heavy hitters with Sly 2 Band of Thieves up first. And to show you some of the muscle here with the Air, I have Sly 2 running at 3 times the native resolution of the PlayStation 2 using the Air's balance preset. And this is a game that is quite problematic for PlayStation 2 emulation on Android, and even with the balanced mode preset, we can easily brute force most of the issues here with this game. And if that wasn't impressive enough, I've got God of War 2 here running likewise at 3 times the native PlayStation 2 resolution, But this time I went ahead and changed the preset to the Eco mode. And it's quite amazing that we can run God of War 2 with this level of upscaling using the Eco setting. Let's now push the device a bit harder, and PlayStation 3 on Android has really started to pick up steam this year, with the arrival of RPCS3 for Android, which has now become RPCSX. And while it's still very early in development, there's a lot that can be done even at this stage. And with something like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, we have a good amount of power to run a lot of games at full speed with only some adjustments needed for the settings. But in general, as long as compatibility is there, lighter PSN style games, like two of my personal favorites, Afterburner Climax and Resogun, run quite well with RPCSX at the native resolution of 720p, with the air set to use the balance mode preset, again just showing what that balance preset can do. Let's now switch over to the Nintendo side, and we will jump right into some Gamecube with F-Zero GX using the Dolphin emulator from the Play Store and balance mode again. We have essentially maxed out what can be done here with the Dolphin emulator, and F-Zero GX is running here at 6 times the native Gamecube resolution, which is the equivalent of a 4K resolution. And again, we're just doing this with the balance mode, and it really does demonstrate just how powerful that Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 is even with this setting. It's also completely unnecessary given the resolution of the display, but this is more to demonstrate that it can be done, and the beautiful thing is that with this level of upscaling, you can easily scale it back to improve on battery life. And Wii fares just as well using the Dolphin emulator, and I decided to load up a different game this time around, but one that I also really enjoy for the Wii since it's a lot of fun and visually looks gorgeous. Sonic Colors makes a return to the channel, and like with F-Zero GX, we are enjoying this game at 6 times the native Wii resolution for some 4K goodness with Sonic Colors using the balance mode preset, and even in the harder spots, the game stays smooth with very minor dips and truly is a great metric for the type of performance we can expect across the board with Gamecube and Wii, which really gives us a lot of room to make adjustments as needed. Now, another Nintendo platform that I've been enjoying a lot on Android recently has been the Wii U using this CMU emulator, which got an update a few weeks ago, and it's still very much a work in progress, but I do enjoy showing off what is potentially possible with these devices. Now, one of the things I really love doing with this emulator is going into the graphic packs and adjusting all of the options available. For Wii U, I'm still using the balance mode preset on the REDMAGIC 10 Air, which provides plenty of power to run games like Yoshi's Woolly World at a full 60 frames per second, and at a higher resolution than what was possible on the console itself. In fact, we have ultra-wide resolutions available to us, and so I went ahead and used a resolution of 2560 by 1080, and between the 60 frames per second and this resolution, the game looks absolutely stunning. And of course, longtime viewers of the channel know how much I love using Fast Racing Neo as a great way to benchmark the possibilities with CMU. For this game, like Yoshi's Woolly World, I am set to use an ultra-wide resolution of 2560 by 1080, and the reason why I love using Fast Racing Neo as a benchmark game for performance is because we can actually set the in-game frame rate past 60 frames per second for this game, and so I have used the 120 frames per second option, and using that higher resolution than what was possible on the Wii U itself, we are well past 60 frames per second using just the balance mode preset, and so we have lots of room here to tweak settings depending on if you want to hit the higher frame rate or if you want the slightly higher resolution, but regardless, this looks fantastic and runs great. Now let's get really crazy with performance and check out Nintendo 3DS emulation with a newer emulator known as Azahar, and for this I rounded up some usual favorites to test 3DS performance with, and I was really blown away by what we can do here with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, and with the REDMAGIC 10 Air set to use balance mode, we've got enough juice on hand to run games like Mario Kart 7 and Super Mario 3D Land at 10 times the native 3DS resolution, which is the max upscaling setting for this emulator, and outside of some minor dips due to shader compilation, these games ran beautifully and looked absolutely incredible. And I actually really enjoy playing 3DS on a mobile device, since I think the wider aspect ratio lends itself quite well to have a large main screen and then the smaller touchscreen at the side, which I think is a pretty good setup. We've got one more Nintendo platform to check out with some Nintendo Switch, of course, and for this I am using the latest version of the Sudachi emulator, and we're going to go ahead and still rock that balance mode preset, because honestly the results are very good using this setting, and we can enjoy the Switch library at 2 times the native Switch resolution using the docked mode setting, which is the equivalent of 4K. And I tested some of my favorites like Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, as well as a bit of Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and these games look absolutely gorgeous in 4K. And I have to be honest, I took a moment just to stare at the screen and admire the gorgeous art, which looks so clean and sharp at 4K, especially on this excellent display. As always, Switch emulation is quite fragmented right now, and so the results will vary based on the game, and you will need to do some experimentation with drivers. But thanks to the fact that the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 is much more mature with driver support than even something like the newer 8 Elite, the results and performance with Switch emulation is very good. And for example, Mario had some issues with the graphics that I was able to resolve by just going back to an older version of the Mesa Turnip drivers using 24.3 instead of a newer version. And speaking of very good compatibility, it wouldn't be a Retro Tech Dad showcase if I didn't include some Winlator, and with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, I don't think it's all too surprising that the results are very good, and I've been using Tomb Raider 2013 as sort of my own personal benchmark game for Winlator across various devices. And on the REDMAGIC 10 Air using the latest version of Winlator 10, we are hitting around 60 frames per second using a resolution of 1280 by 720. But we can turn the in-game settings to high while still using the balance preset for the Air, which is very impressive. And Transformers War for Cybertron is another gem from PC that I absolutely love that has been unfortunately delisted and lost to time. But this is a fantastic game that I recommend tracking down, and like Tomb Raider, it performs incredibly well here with Winlator. And I have all of the in-game settings maxed out, but for this game I went ahead and used a resolution of 1920 by 1080. And again, the results are just excellent with the balance preset. So we've covered native gaming and emulation, and there's just one more gaming related topic to discuss, which is game streaming, and for this I will be using the combination of Artemis and Apollo. The Air has a few things going for it when it comes to game streaming, including built-in Wi-Fi 7, plus the excellent decoding prowess of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, which can also utilize the experimental ultra-low latency mode in Artemis. And of course, when paired with a telescopic controller, results in an experience that is just excellent. And here on the Air, we have average decoding times of around 3 milliseconds, which is some of the lowest I've seen on an Android device. Also, another fun and underrated use case for a mobile device with its ultra-wide aspect ratio is playing PC games in its ultra-wide format, which is natively supported in many PC games, and for someone who does ultra-wide gaming on a desktop PC, this is pretty cool to see here. And after all of this gaming, what can we potentially expect in terms of battery performance with the 6000 mAh battery? And for my lighter battery test, I'm using Yoshi's Island for Super Nintendo, using the REDMAGIC 10 Air's Eco preset with the power saving option turned on from the start, the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth turned off. With 50% brightness and volume, we managed almost 15.5 hours of on-screen time. Now for a more demanding test, I was able to run God of War 2 for the PlayStation 2 at 3 times native resolution, using the same Eco preset, but this time I had the power saving option turned off, with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth still off, and the same 50% brightness and volume, and the Air managed about 4 hours of uninterrupted on-screen time, until the extreme battery saver option turned on, limiting performance at the 10% mark. Finally, I bumped the Air to the balance preset, but this time I went with 4 times the native resolution with the same settings as before, and we got about 2.5 hours of uninterrupted on-screen time, until the extreme battery saver option turned on, limiting performance at the 10% mark. The good news is that the Air does support 80 watt fast charging and will get back to a full 100% charge in under 1 hour and nearly 60% in just 30 minutes. And that does it for this in-depth video of the REDMAGIC 10 Air, and I think REDMAGIC has put together another great gaming focused device that balances some features in order to bring a lower price package to their audience. Ultimately, REDMAGIC is competing with themselves in this space, and for not a whole lot more money, you could in theory just grab the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, which does offer the latest and greatest in all of their features, including a slightly better display, the most current Snapdragon chipset, and active cooling. But as it stands, the Air provides a lot of value for its price point, and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 does have a slight advantage with driver support, which allows it to go a bit further. At the end of the day, I don't think you can go wrong with either REDMAGIC 10 device as long as you're willing to concede on some of the more common flagship niceties like superior cameras and much longer software support. REDMAGIC continues to provide awesome performance for less, and it's always a welcome thing in a space that keeps rising in prices. So what do you think about the REDMAGIC 10 Air, and will you be considering this or another device in the future? Let me know down in the comments, and as always, until the next video, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.